Can everybody hear me? Good morning. Can everybody hear me? I just want to make sure. Eugene?
Yep, loud
Yeah.
and clear.
Yep.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Mazen Dudar. Really quick, I worked for LA County 33 years. I was a senior engineer running field offices, and I simply gave a 3-day notice one day and I retired, only to find out 6 months after I could not. I love that stuff too much. I had to go back into it and to it. And I took a little break here and there. I'm presently with Wildan. Sometimes I work the full week. Sometimes I work a day. I'm enjoying it. I love being there. I love doing this training. This is pretty much my specialty over the years. The actual presentation is 250 slides. It's a full 2-day. I used to stand up and do the whole thing, but it's a little too much for everybody, even for my brain. So I put as much as I can, about 100 slides into today's thing, which is about fire-rated openings and opening protectives or opening protection for fire-rated assemblies. We're going to get into that. The only two things I have to tell you is I try not to read much of the slides. Some of the slides have a lot of write-ups, so I'll save you the time, give you an idea what's there and move on, or take you a diagram that actually explains everything much easier. That's pretty much the plan. And the only thing I also have to tell you is it's really in series. The whole setup is in series, meaning if you answer emails, if you get up, take a walk, come back, I hate to tell you this, but you will be lost. You can't catch up. And my last advice to you, if you within 72 hours find the time to spend an hour and go over it again on your own, this is how you retain and have the most retention. 80% of that information is not retained after 3 days, actually, and that's just science. So with that, I will start. Welcome, all of you. I see there's over 100 people. I'm delighted to see a lot of people that I know and support the chapter. And with that, we'll get moving. So I'm going to be doing a lot of talking there, so excuse me, and just I will give it a little room for the questions, maybe around third of the way or midway. Be patient, write a few questions if you have, and we'll try to get to them time permitting. Why do we need a Chapter 7? Who should attend this seminar? How much do you need to know? And how important is the inspector's knowledge with all of this? Finally, should there be a final walkthrough on other than regular inspections on specific projects relevant to this chapter? We're going to talk about a lot of these things as the seminar progresses. As you know, these are the state fire marshal assemblies. And why is this important? Assemblies, A, the R, the I, the E, the H, and the labs are all state fire marshal occupancies. In every training you go to, you will hear about this repeatedly, and you pretty much have to memorize them always, that these are the SFM occupancies. The reason I bring that up is there will be few slides in this chapter that has to do with SFM occupancies or non-SFM occupancy. So it's important that you actually get glued to know what's SFM occupancies. Rated assemblies, what is actually an assembly to begin with? The way I define an assembly is different than the code. The way I defined it is bunch of stuff and material put together and slapped around, so it gives you a 30-minute, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, or a 4 hour rating. And what is a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, and why are they needed? They are simply needed because the elderlies, it will take them time to get out of a building. And sometimes you can put somebody in a wheelchair and wheel him out quick. And maybe somebody who's 45 in good health can run and does not need the 1 hour wall. And a 1 hour wall is pretty much theoretical, meaning it takes the fire a full hour before it crosses that wall, or 2 hours sometimes technically based on test data and UL and ASTM fire tests. Yet, do we need all of this? Highly likely, no. But what is the life of safety percentage that we have in this country as far as fatalities from fire? It's very low. And the reason for that is because we have great protection systems in place. So when a lot of people say, I don't need a 2 hour wall here, everybody can get out in 3 minutes. That's all true, but not everybody can. That's why we have areas of evacuation, sometimes inside the building, sometimes outside. We have rated assemblies. We're going to get into all of that. But again, rated assemblies are extremely important. Now, this class is really good for building officials, inspectors, and specifically and especially plan check engineers. If you're new and you've been around building and safety less than 5 years, and your knowledge of Chapter 7 is non-existent or mediocre, this is really like the kind of jolt class that wakes you up. So there's a lot in it that you are going to learn. And with all modesty, I have to tell you, this would probably be maybe the next to best seminar in Chapter 7, if not the best that you would have, relevant to covering general information there, guiding you through the chapter and navigating how to use certain things and why do certain things happen. Okay, we're going to talk about fire resistance rated assemblies, and they are all in front of you. I put a red line on the smoke barriers, partitions, etc., because we're not going to cover those in the class, in the seminar. And normally these are a part of a hospital setup, and so be it if that's the case. Yet we're not really going to cover them today. Most of these will end up being in hospital setups where it's under OSHPD. So due to this, we're not covering it in this seminar today. Now, as far as Section 711, I just want to let you know that 711's name has changed to horizontal and roof assemblies when it used to be horizontal assemblies in the present code. So I just wanted to write the new name in there. Firewalls, fire barriers, fire partitions, vertical openings, we're going to cover all of that. Shaft enclosures, there's a lot that we're going to cover, and we're going to go through it one step at a time. Okay, a lot of people attending this class may not even know about the UBC. Maybe people like Richard Lucas was here, maybe would know what the UBC is. And he may have heard of those terminologies before. But since the UBC has kind of parted us about since 2006, I would say, it's been about 17 years. A lot of people have retired, and a lot of people don't even know what the UBC is or was. Yet a lot of us are seasoned veterans that still know what the UBC is. Look to the left and see what all the new names that have been put in the IBC from 2006. And look what the case was in the UBC. A lot of that stuff didn't even exist. Fire partition used to be called the 1 hour rated wall. So when a building inspector walks into your office, and by the way, if the pace is a little bit fast, my apology, it is a lot of material we have to cover, but a lot of it is actually just narrative. So bear with me, and we'll get through this. Building inspector walks through the office and looks at the plan checker, and he actually shakes his head, and it happened to a lot of plan check engineers. And he goes, they're butchering that firewall. Okay, when you come in now and you say they're butchering that firewall, what exactly do you mean? The firewall, the fire barrier, the fire partition? What exactly are you talking about? Before, we didn't used to ask these questions. Now you have to actually know what you're talking about. They're butchering the fire partition or the barrier or the, if you just use the word firewall, a plan check engineer is going to say to anyone, what exactly are you talking about? What firewall? Is it a fire barrier? Is it a fire partition? So we all need to be on the same page, and so we are able to communicate better. Okay, here are all the ASTM standards that we use in tests. The most important one is the one on top, ASTM 119. That's the test for building construction and material. That's the one they run for a 1 hour test, 2 hour test, etc., etc. NFPA has another number equivalent to that, and UL has another number equivalent to that. But ASTM 119 is the one that is most known. And these are same tests, but different standards. ASTM E119, NFPA 251, UL 263. Any one of those three are equivalent to each other, pretty much. If not 100%, they're 99%. And if you meet one, you normally meet the other. So these are the three tests that you always want to keep in mind, and the most referenced tests. What exactly are the tests, and how do they go through it is really beyond the scope of this seminar. Okay, establishing fire resistance rating. We talked about ASTM 119. We talked about UL 263. When we normally have these kind of tests, you're not allowed to have a cooling effect or fire suppression system. So if you're testing a wall for a 1 hour or 2 hours, you cannot be hosing it down or have some kind of sprinklers on it and test it during that. It's tested, without it, unless that specific test will require that you use the cooling effect. But normally speaking, you do not do that. The building official can always accept under the alternate methods and modifications anything else than a 1 hour, 2 hour, or a 3 hour recognized assembly through methods of testing, or through methods by calculation, which I cannot go over again due to time constraints, but there's a way to calculate what every assembly is good for, half an hour, 1 hour. You can actually calculate that. Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty stuff now. Important definitions. What are the things that are considered important, relevant to definitions in this chapter? First thing you're dealing with is fire partition. So it's a vertical assembly. It's a wall. It's a 1 hour wall. It's as simple as that. Now, where do you see the fire partition? Again, I'm not going to read everything. I will save you the trouble and give you a quick idea of what we're dealing with. Rated corridor walls, which chapter 10 tells you if you don't have a sprinklered building and you got occupant load more than 30, you got to have a rated corridor wall. So that wall is actually a fire partition. Walls separating dwellings between the ADU and the house, between the two condos, between the rooms in the hotel, in a motel, between the tenants in covered malls. All of those things actually require a fire partition. The complete list is in 708.1 of the code. Now, there is in 2016 or 19, I can't recall, there was something new that was added is walls between tenants and high rises and types 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5A for specific groups would also require 1 hour fire partitions or fire partitions. Once you say fire partition, it is known that it's a 1 hour wall. Okay, here's a summary. I urge you when you're dealing with anything in chapter 7, you can go to the code anytime, and this is really the reference. But feel free, and it's always good to come in and take a look at all the summaries that I have for you. If you're dealing with a fire partition and you want the summary and you don't want to miss anything, here are your summaries relevant to that. I have an arrow next to the openings, and it shows you that if you have doors in a rated corridor, then you need 20-minute self-closing door, rated 20-minute door, which is self-closing. The transom and side lights, meaning the windows that are next to the door, to the left, to the right, or above it, are called transoms or side lights. These need to be 45-minute. And any other window within that corridor where you normally have that corridor, let's say, and a ballroom or an assembly conference room somewhere, and they have it all windows. If this happens to be a rated corridor, you are going to need 45-minute window assembly rating. Okay. I just wanted to check. Can everybody hear me now? Eugene, are you there? ICC?
Yes, we are, Mazen.
Great, great. Just a sound check. Okay. Types of sprinkler systems. This is in chapter 9, but I thought I would bring it up and let you know what that is for those who do not know. There are 3 types. One is 13D, 13R, and 13 with their respective sections in chapter 9. The 13D is the one that you use for new homes, ADUs. The 13R is the one that you would use in a hotel, motel, and apartments. And the NFPA 13 is the one that you would use like in a tilt-up building, in a commercial building, office building, etc. I just want you to know these 3 are different. It's not a part of this because in chapter 9. But for those who don't know what are the 3 systems, here they are. Okay, let's talk about fire separation distance, which is also called the setback. The setback is the distance measured between the face of the wall and between the property line. In this example, you can see the 30 feet on top, the 75 feet on the right-hand side at the bottom, 15 feet at the bottom, etc., etc. And these are all setbacks. They've changed the word. There's no word of setback anymore in the code. It's called fire separation distance. I don't like that. I like to call it setback, but because we're dealing with chapter 7 and it's a fire chapter, the name is fire separation distance. What happens when you have buildings that looks like that? Take a look at the top, take a look on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side. You will see the FSD. Left and right are easy. The top ones, this is how you would measure it. You would measure it perpendicular to the building. You do not measure it perpendicular to the property line. The FSD line is actually perpendicular to the building, and that would be the distance that you will measure for your setback / fire separation distance. Okay. Now, when we're dealing with a 1 hour or a 2 hour wall, and you look at certain tables in the code and you tell a architect or anybody else you need a 1 hour wall or a 2 hour wall, etc., etc., the one thing I want you to know is that it's different when it comes to non-SFM occupancies versus SFM occupancies. Here's the difference. Non-SFM occupancies, if your separation distance is under or equal to 10 feet, and that wall needs to be rated for 2 hours, then you need to have the 2 hours rated on both sides of the wall. The whole assembly need to be there. So you will go to a 2 hour assembly and you will choose it, and that would be it. If you're more than 10 feet, your rating is only required on the inside. If they decide to put siding on the outside, technically they can, but I would say no more than 0.5% of the people out there know that you can do this, rather than putting a full assembly, for example. And they want, then everybody usually says 2 hours, I'll give you the 2 hours, and case is closed. So I don't go out there advertising all of this because I'm an advocate for safety. But can you only do it on the inside? Yes, you can. Yet nonetheless, nobody does that. However, it's in the code. If you're dealing with an SFM occupancy, only the situation on top is going to prevail. The one at the bottom, I put an X to it because if you're more than 10 feet, it doesn't mean it doesn't apply. If you're more than 10 feet, you go back to the situation on top. And I did not really explain that very well in the slide. This was adjusted about 5:30 this morning, and my brain was still really not that functional yet. And I decided to add this slide for the SFM. But when you have more than 10 feet, then you revert back to the one on top. Then you have to rate both sides. Nothing is going to change. Okay, let's talk about an example now. So if I am dealing with Group M, Type 3A, my separation distance 6 feet to the property line, I need to analyze the interior and exterior rating for the wall. It is a Group M. Now, I do not have all the tables at all times. And you can write this down and check it. If you go to table 601 of the code, you will realize that you would need 2 hour walls based on the information that is given on the first line on top. And if you go to 705.5, it would require 1 hour based on that information. Now, mind you, table 705.5 was table 602, and it got moved to section 705 in the code. I believe that was done last cycle, 2019. And the reason for that, it is exposure of exterior walls. So they decided to actually put it in chapter 7 under the exterior wall section, which is section 705. They left 601 where it's at, but 602 got moved. Now, as you know, when it comes to the code, you have to go with the one that will govern. When you have two situations, the 2 hour is going to govern, and the 2 hour assembly is required on both sides, since the fire separation is less than 10 feet, and it's a non-SFM occupancy. Look at that. Look at the top figure. It is less than 10 feet, and it's a non-SFM occupancy, so I need it on both sides. And that concludes this example. Okay, let's talk about fire barrier. What is a fire barrier? Fire barrier is pretty much your run-of-the-mill, in my opinion, in chapter 7. Just about anything and everything out there other than what we talked about in the partition earlier, the fire partition, will fit into a fire barrier. It is actually the exit enclosure, exit passageway, horizontal exit, incidental accessory occupancies, and separated uses. I'm not going to get into the definition of any of these because all of these are chapter 10 and chapter 5. Chapter 5 was covered previously in a seminar about maybe 6 weeks ago, and the chapter 10 is not in the scope of this presentation. However, anytime you're dealing with those, you are going to have a fire barrier to some degree, either 1 hour or 2 hours. Okay, we're going to continue with fire barriers. Again, here are all the areas that would require a fire barrier. This is a little bit of write-up on the red. This is a complete list and where they are located. So anytime you want to know If you need a 1 hour based on what you have, I gave you the section, I gave you what is going to be required, 1 or 2 hours. On the atriums, I just put in 2023 coded changes just for anybody who likes to read about atriums. I want you to know there's been a lot of changes or some changes in the 2023 code. It's not a part of the presentation, but I just wanted to let you know. All of these actually would require a 1 hour or 2 hours, or it may actually varies, like the bottom 2 cases. And all of these are examples of fire barriers. It's a very good guide, this table, where to go and what is the actual rating that's going to be required. And the section is going to tell you exactly what is the rating that's going to be required, depending on the situation that you have. Okay, we are still discussing fire barriers, but there's this table here, 707-310, which actually deals with fire areas. Now, what is a fire area? In a nutshell, if you are running out of allowable area in a building because of what's allowable to build, you can put in a fire area and follow certain provisions and make 2 separate buildings. When you put in the firewall, you create 2 separate fire areas. And when you create separate fire areas, that wall is actually going to be rated. And the rating of that is going to be as a fire barrier. Let's go over that again. It's a little confusing. I'm going to start from the beginning. If you actually have an allowable area problem, you can introduce a firewall. Okay, so I'm going to take back what I said. A firewall has nothing to do with this particular section. However, you can introduce a fire barrier between 2 fire areas that you create, and depending on the occupancy, you would be having to rate the fire barriers based on this table. So if I have a building and I decided to create 2 separate fire areas for whatever reason, and I end up putting a fire barrier in between the 2 fire areas, and one of the areas was an F1, the other one was a B, looking at that table, you're going to have to go with the 3 hours. F1 is 3, the B is 2. You have to go with the most restrictive, it's 3. If I have 2 fire areas between A and a B, then it's a 2 hour. The definition of a fire area is below this table here, in case you decide to read it. That's the actual language from the code itself. Summary of the fire barrier. Summary of the fire barrier is in front of you. The maximum size of any opening is 156, and you cannot go more than 25% of the wall length. Again, you need the summary. Just go back and take a look at this. It will help you a lot. Important definitions. What's a firewall now? Well, it's a wall you're going to introduce in there where the situation is going to be one of those 3. Look at the bottom one. A horizontal exit, meaning you run out of travel distance because you're allowed a certain travel distance in Chapter 10. You run out of travel distance, you will introduce a firewall, and that firewall could as a horizontal exit. Some people would argue the horizontal exit is also a fire barrier. Well, to me, it's always a firewall that you put in there when you put in a horizontal exit for that. And the allowable area consideration is a problem sometimes. You will have to put in a firewall, that's number 2 now, to deal with the allowable area and split the building into 2 buildings. Finally, a party wall. What is a party wall? A party wall is a wall that is actually between 2 buildings, yet that party wall is actually the common property line between them. That wall cannot have any openings, and that wall, when built, has to be a party wall. So somebody has a building on the property line, the other adjacent parcel, somebody comes in, puts in another building right next to it, and now there's a huge problem because there has to be a party wall, and the common wall that's already existing on the common property line is not a known firewall / party wall. The solution is easy. The new building will just put in another firewall immediately adjacent and abutting the existing wall. But then they come to you and they want to put an opening between those walls because they want the forklift to go through, and they're the same owner. Well, you tell them you cannot have that. It's a party wall. They can with an alternate method or a modification and a building official approval, as long as it's registered and documented that if they sell the buildings, they have to sell them separate and put it back together, or the building can only be sold as is with the opening, and both buildings have to be sold together. They cannot fragment the two buildings and sell them. It's up to the discretion of the building official.
Mason.
Yes.
Hey, this is Eric Lim. Had a quick question for you.
Go ahead.
So if I'm understanding right, so firewall is to create fire areas for allowable area and what you're talking about, versus for a fire barrier, that's for occupancy separation. Is that correct?
Fire barrier is an occupancy separation. Well, firewall is to deal with it relevant to creating allowable area provisions. If you have run out of problems with fire
Right.
areas, allowable area, you put in the firewall, and that will solve the problem. Now, if you decide to have occupancy separations, that's section 508.9. Okay.
Right.
But there are times where you would create separate fire areas of different occupancies.
Right.
Okay, if you create fire areas of different occupancies normally within the same building, that's when you're actually putting in 707-310. These are fire barriers.
Fire barriers, right?
Yeah, it is confusing.
No, I get you. So you could have firewalls to create separate areas for allowable area, and within each fire area, you could have fire barriers separating occupancies.
That is correct. And you can,
okay, that's it.
Okay. It's really confusing, and it's not that easy. Even I have to read it 50 times every time. Okay.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Summary of the firewalls are all there. Feel free to jump in if anybody has a question. You don't have to worry about raising the hand. I am on schedule. If I say hold off, I'll come back. But just say the word, the question, and I will pause. Let's do it that way and see how that goes. If we run into a time issue, we'll kind of stop it a little bit. Summary of firewalls. If you read this, it'll tell you the summary of any firewall you're dealing with. I don't want to tell you don't go to the code, but whatever the code tells me, it's right in front of you in that table. The most important one is the openings. How much openings can you have a firewall? 156 square feet, no more than 25% of the wall length, similar to the fire barrier. Now, the marking and identification. Anytime you have a firewall, fire barrier, fire partition, it has to go all the way vertically to the roof or above the roof. And you have to label it so it does not get chopped during construction or remodel. So every 30 feet, I'm assuming you have a firewall, let's say, or a fire barrier that's 300 feet. So the way to do it is you have to start labeling it. Look at where the ceiling is. Now I'm in the attic. You have to go and put in fire barrier, protect all openings, and it'll tell you the number of how high the writing should be, where the sign should be. It should start no more than 30 feet to intervals and within 15 feet of end of wall. We're not talking about a 10-foot fire barrier here or a firewall. We're talking about a 200-300, where you actually have to do that so a contractor or somebody can see this and realize we cannot cut that. Let's go back to the design architect and to the building department. This is the narrative. This is basically something that they can put in there. And this is a little diagram. I don't even know who that guy is in the picture, to be honest with you, and why ICC has that guy in there. But these things kind of just makes me smile a little bit. Okay. Now let's talk about exterior walls and the allowable area of openings. The code has changed a lot in the past 10 years. The code now allows you to actually have unprotected and protected openings within the same wall, which is rated for 1 hour and 2 hours. To me, I don't like that because the fire doesn't know where it's going to go. The fire is not going to know which area is protected and which opening is not protected, I mean. And to me, I do not like that. I'm not in the committee. I don't see this table going anywhere. It's been there for a while. So we respect it. We use it. Yet you always can say the fire is not going to know what's protected and what's not protected. And I wonder if that's the right thing to do. Well, that's the code. And we move along till something or somebody changes that one day. The way it goes is always less than 100%. So your actual protected over allowable plus the actual unprotected over the allowable unprotected must be less than or equal to 1. Here is the table, which is not going to mean anything to you right now till we get into an example. So I'm going to get directly into an example and shows you how that works. show you how that works. Here's a little example. I got an S1 building, type 3 can be construction, and the exterior wall is 12 feet from an interior lot line. I need to determine the maximum area permitted for the unprotected openings. Okay, so I look at the 18 by 40 at the bottom. I see that the designer wants to put in a protected fire door and another protected fire door. Their total there is 83, and as you can see it in the numerator on the left. Now, what is your allowable? Your allowable is 45% based on the distance, 10 to 15 on the left column. Your allowable is 45% on protected, 15% unprotected. Remember, this was a non-sprinkler building. Here is your 45% times 18 times 40. And then you're solving for the A sub F, which is the permitted amount of unprotected openings, knowing their allowables is 15%. You solve and it ends up basically to be 81. 81 is how much you're going to be left with as far as unprotected openings. Or you can say, this is the unprotected openings. I want to solve for the protected openings. And you can pick and choose where you want to place them. It's up to you. Again, it's not my favorite thing in the code, but it's in the code, and that table is extremely important. This is the same thing as the table itself, but use it only if you're dealing with unprotected, percent of openings allowed. This is the same thing as the table, but I trimmed it a little bit and did not put in the sprinklering. But this is the actual table. This is the one you should always go to. Do not worry about Mazen's creation. Stick with this. Okay. Let's go back and talk about rated assemblies. These are all the rated assemblies in the code, and this is their respective sections. We talked about some of them, and we're going to talk about a little bit more. I put all the sections in front of you, and like I said, smoke barrier, smoke partition, smoke fire barrier, we're not going to talk about that today. Okay, this one has a lot of mumbo jumbo. I'm going to save you that in section 70586 and take you directly to a diagram and explain it to you. Here I am dealing, I got two diagrams that are the same. If I have two buildings on the same lot, first thing for the allowable area, I can consider both of them per chapter 5 to be if the aggregate allowable area meets the allowable area for the most restrictive occupancy, including setbacks, fire separation distance, etc., etc. If both of them are within that allowables, then I don't need to worry about that at all. But if I have a lot and I decide to put building on the left and the one on the right is existing, I need, unless I'm doing the allowable area as one building and I decide to put another building on the lot, I have to put in a imaginary property line in the middle, and I need 15 feet minimum. If I do not have the 15 feet, and if I also do not have the openings on the buildings on the left at least 15 feet higher than the roof of the building on the right, there is going to be a requirement to protect the windows in the buildings on the left. Now, it shows section 704.3. This is an old diagram at the bottom. I think this has changed to 705. My apology. Here is the same diagram, just a little bit differently shown. If I have less than 15 on either side and my openings are less than 15, I got a problem there, and I need to rate the openings on the building on the left. The only way I can get out of it is if I have a 1-hour roof assembly on the building on the right, meaning that it's a 1-hour roof. 1-hour roof doesn't mean a class A, meaning the assembly needs to be a 1 hour, like the roof ceiling assembly. This does not happen too often, but I just want you to be aware. If you bring in a second building and you put it next to one and you say, okay, I'm going to put an imaginary line in the middle and rate the openings as required in chapter 5 and 7, keep in mind that this provision also would apply, and you have to include it in your analysis, which a lot of people do not. But again, it doesn't happen too often, but it does happen. Okay, now required opening protection for exterior walls. When you need to rate fire doors, we're going to go later to a specific table. We're going to go also a specific table in section 17, 716.1 for fire windows. And remember, we just talked about rating all those stuff here. All those openings on the left-hand side of unprotected openings or protected openings, those protected openings per this section here, if you have a sprinklered building, the exterior openings may be protected by an approved water curtain. So I do not like it personally, but again, it's not about me, because if it's a sprinklered building, well, you're just giving me more water on the opening. I don't like that. I already have water, and my water supply could be messed up very quickly in an earthquake. Who knows? I would rather have the rated openings and the rated shutters and all that. But again, you cannot deny an applicant the important exception if they want to approach you and put in a water curtain, which is the sprinklers that are probably on the outside, maybe also on the inside if you require as a building official. And the city of LA, I think, has a detail relevant to how that's done or how that's approved. I did not see it much in LA County. A lot of the designers, architects simply do not know about that. Is it really your job to advertise it? You can if you want to. It's in the code. You're not really hiding anything. It's not my favorite thing, but the code does allow you to put that instead of rating the exterior openings, which are very expensive. Putting a water curtain is a whole lot cheaper than rated openings, etc., etc. Okay, we're also going to talk about ducts that are penetrating rated assemblies in section 717 and how to deal with that. Exterior wall summary. Basically, look at the openings. The most important section is the openings, and that's why I have a red line next to it. Basically, it's everything we talked about, and that's the summary of the exterior wall section. I'm going to go back to fire partitions very quickly. And I wanted to list them all clearly for you with the sections of when is it required. You see all of those cases right there. So if you're dealing with a project and you're not sure when it's required, take a look at this and it will tell you. It'll tell you when it's required and where do you actually have to go to read more about it. When you're not sure whether you need a 1 hour wall or not, here is your summary, including the SFM change that was added in 2019 or 2016. Now, anytime you penetrate a rated fire partition, we're dealing with fire partitions, you would need to have a fire damper. I just wanted to let you know there's an exception in the code. If you have a sprinkler building other than a group H, you can omit that fire damper in a fire partition, provided you are dealing with a 26 gauge HVAC duct. Omitting fire dampers is really, really, really a huge saver as far as money goes. Anybody has any questions before I continue really quick, or shall I keep on going? Hello? Anyone? Cynthia?
Mazen, I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay, great. So I'm going to continue. I'm going to continue.
Yeah.
And then, let's see how we're doing on time. We're doing fantastic on time.
Yep.
Okay. This now gets a little bit hairy as we get into the subject matter. We're going to dig a little deeper now. We're going to talk about penetrations, protection of openings, and how do we deal with duct and air transfer openings when they're actually penetrating a rated assembly, which is section 717. I forgot to show you the fire partition summary. This actually should have come after, before this last slide, but if you do need it, I think I showed it in 2 locations. The one in red gives you a quick idea what sections and what do you have to rate when you actually have openings within a fire partition. Of course, a fire partition is a rated 1 hour wall. Okay. Now we're going to be dealing with, let me see here. Okay. We're going to be dealing with opening protectives. So when I have a firewall, we talked about it having no more than 156 square foot of openings. And it also needs to meet the criteria of 25% of the length of the wall. So if I have a 1,000 square foot firewall, I cannot have more than 156 square feet in area as far as the opening goes, total openings. And as far as the length of the openings, I'm restricted to 250 feet. That's basically what is required. Now, remember we talked about no openings are allowed in party walls. So when you actually have another guy that buys a building and he owns the building next door, and they need to put a party wall, and they say they want to create an openings are not allowed in party walls located on a lot line between adjacent buildings. This overrules all provisions allowed regarding allowable openings. We're going to get into some areas now with openings and how big they can be and the exceptions and all that. If you have to have an opening in a party wall, you would need building official approval, period. There's the end of that, because you can't have any. Yet we know what the needs are. Building and Safety wants to help all the developers, all the property owners. And usually, if they have the right thing in place, meaning they put in a party wall with the right opening size, protections, etc., building official would likely consider their alternate method of construction in lieu of the party wall. So just keep it in mind that an opening between two buildings where a party wall is or will be, it can indeed be considered or approved by a building official or considered for approval. Okay, here are your summary of all the firewall. The one thing I'm not really going through is, like, when you're dealing with a firewall, look at the required continuity. Second item on the left. So vertically, it needs to go 30 inches above the roof. There are exceptions. Horizontally, when you're dealing with a firewall, it actually needs to go from one side of the building to the other, and it actually has to wrap around 1 foot. It has to wrap around 4 feet, and you have to have a 1 hour protection there. And if you got windows there, now you also need to deal with how to protect those windows, because you now have a 1 hour wraparound and you got a window in there. So the window is going to have to be rated according to what's required to a 1 hour wall, for example. You can run into all kinds of challenges, but here is your summary. It's pretty much everything you would need to have as far as a summary. Okay, we're going to cycle back. Yes.
There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
One of them said, can we talk about non-rated corridor construction and smoke dampers, etc., for non-rated corridors?
Okay, if you have a non-rated corridor, there is no smoke dampers. There is nothing anymore. There is nothing rated. Usually when you have a non-rated corridor, two things have to prevail. Table 1020.1, if you have a sprinklered building, and let's say you have an M or a B occupancy, you do not need it per that table. And you have to go to that table first and determine that a corridor is required or not. Now, what I need to bring up that's very important, and that's chapter 10. Just because you see a corridor, we call it corridor. They tried to create the word corridor and hallway a long time ago, and they miserably failed. So they took the word hallway out of the code and went back to corridors only. So the way to deal with it is you first have to establish whether you have a rated corridor or not. If you have a rated corridor system per the provisions of table 1020.1 in chapter 10, now you know that your corridor has to be 1 hour rated, or whatever rating is in that table. Usually it's a fire partition and 1 hour, and you got to deal with protecting all the elements of that corridor. And I'm going to get to that as well in a specific slide that you are going to absolutely love. It's going to show you how to protect anything and everything and every single fire assembly out there in one little diagram and one little table that my daughter created about 13 years ago. And I gave her money for that. Anyway, so corridors, if they're not rated, you don't have to do anything. If they are rated, then you have to follow the provisions of what's required for fire partitions and the forthcoming table. But just because you see a corridor in a building, don't jump right away and just tell them, oh, this is a corridor because the architect said corridor. Now you tell them rate the corridor. No, it's still called a corridor, but is it rated or not? You have to go back and look at the table. We used to say hallway and corridor, so we know, but the thing is, unless you're like a licensed architect and know the difference between them, or a seasoned veteran plan checkers and know the difference between hallway and corridor, the whole idea failed miserably. So they took it out and they just went back to the word corridor. Just because you see corridor, it doesn't mean it's a rated corridor. You have to establish that it's actually rated. Let me take question number 2. Hello?
It just says 40% of wall length. Oh, when is it 40% wall length required? Is it just for parking lots?
Say that one more time.
When is 40% wall length required? Is it just for parking lots?
I
From
don't, I
Zena?
don't, I don't understand the question though. What slide is that? What are we talking about? Is there a slide
Zena,
number?
if you want to unmute yourself and then you can maybe ask it.
Yeah, I was the previous slide you talked about 25% added wall length. I was
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
The 25. There's no 40%. There's a 25% wall length when you have a fire barrier or a firewall, and let's say the fire barrier is 100 feet or the firewall is 100 feet. There's a requirement in the code for both of them that the maximum length of openings, not the depth, length of openings along that 100-foot wall cannot exceed the 25%. So you're limited to 25 feet, relevant to how much of length of openings you can have in that wall. That 25% does not increase. We're going to get into criteria now where the 25% would be fully eliminated in a few minutes. But the 25% does not get increased to 40% or anything like that. If we're talking about firewalls and fire barriers, if you are talking about the table of how much protected and unprotected openings you can have, table 705 point whatever, that shows you how much percentage of protected and unprotected openings you can have based on the fire separation distance for exterior walls only. An exterior wall on the outside is not normally a fire barrier. It is usually on the inside of the building, except if it's a part of an exit shaft or whatever. But there is no 40% for firewalls or fire barriers. It's only 25%. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So
Mazen, we got one more since you were talking about corridors and stuff.
Okay.
Let's see. It says, I am confused about smoke damper of rated corridors. You mentioned table smoke protection, even rated for vertical and horizontal separation. I'm not sure. Did you want to unmute yourself and kind of clarify a little bit?
You there? Okay, let me get back to him. I'm not sure I understand the question. We'll put that on hold since he's not talking. Maybe
Mazen,
Oh, there he
Hello?
is. There he is.
Mazen, I'm a little bit confused about the rating of the corridor also.
You're confused about what?
The smoke dampers of the corridors, rated corridor also.
Okay.
I think we
Okay.
need smoke damper for corridors. I mean, if it's rated.
Okay. Yes, I didn't say you don't need them. All I'm saying is you would need. Okay. Oh, you're saying we need a smoke damper, not just a fire damper, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're gonna get to that. I just gave an example relevant to the fire damper, with the exception of the fire damper. I did not say that you do not need a smoke damper. There is a table that will show all of that, and I will get to that at the very, very last slide, actually. If it is required, it will actually be shown in my slide that it is required. Or just the fire damper can be exempt under certain specific rules. We never said that you do not need a fire damper. I believe we just exempted a specific application and that's it. So just hang on. I will get to that in details again. Okay. Thank you. So where are we? I forgot. We are okay. Now I'm on 46. We're going to talk about shaft enclosures now. Shaft enclosures are fire barriers. And I'm not going to read all of this for you. I'm going to show you a simple diagram. Look at this diagram. Look at the right-hand side. I have a shaft that goes from the first level, penetrates the second, the third, and the fourth. When you have a shaft that penetrates, what that actually involves or connects 4 stories or more, that needs to be a 2-hour shaft. On the left-hand side, anytime that you have anything shaft connecting less than 4 stories, then you need a 1 hour. That's basically the requirement of a shaft enclosure, which is a fire barrier. However, be careful. Take a look at the shaft on the left-hand side. This is a 1 hour requirement because it's connecting less than 4 stories. 1, 2, 3. You do not count the roof. The roof penetration does not get counted, by the way. If the floor assembly on the on both sides of that shaft happen to be a 2 hour, okay, then you would actually need to rate that shaft for 2 hour instead of the 1 hour. I'm talking about the one on the left. Look at the one that is actually the 3 hour floor assembly shown at the very bottom of that diagram. There's a 3 hour floor assembly there. The shaft on the left does not penetrate that. So I do not need to make that shaft on the left 3 hours, let alone if I am penetrating a floor assembly more than 1 hour, like 2 hours, the one on the left has to be taken up to 2 hours. If it's 3 hour floor system, it's still gonna go up to 2 hours. The most important thing in this diagram is to know when is a 1 hour required shaft, when is a 2 hour required, and that shaft rating needs to be at least equivalent to the floor assembly it penetrates if the floor assembly is more than what the shaft requirement was to begin with. It's not too confusing. It kind of makes sense. It's just simple fire protection continuity. Okay. As we deal with shaft enclosures, we're going to get into the openings, and that's the section for it, the penetrations in 714, and the shaft penetration by a duct in 717. This is just preparing you of the sections that are coming forward. Now, I'm running actually a little bit behind, so I'm going to speed up just a little bit. Bear with me. I know it's a lot of material. We're halfway through, but honestly, we can do this, and just hang in there and stay focused with me. Okay. When I'm dealing with termination rooms like chutes, when it comes to people in a condo complex, 4-story, they go in there, they throw their garbage and refuse in a chute. It comes to the termination room at the bottom. That could be 4 or 5 stories, and these would be fire barriers based on what I just showed you in this diagram to the right-hand side or to the left, 1 or 2 hours. And then the door actually has to now be rated as well as that required for a shaft enclosure. So the fire barriers may actually be the whole room, plus you need to also rate the door, and the door needs to be self-closing. We don't see that too often, but again, remember, your fire barriers and the termination room at the bottom needs to also follow the same sequence along with the door. The door at one point didn't used to be required, and I know they added it. I just do not remember how long ago, maybe in the 2013 cycle. Okay. You talked about fire barriers when you asked a question on the 25%. I'm going to get into that a little bit deeper. So openings and fire barriers, they're limited to 25%, and the maximum square feet cannot be more than 100 square foot. A maximum single opening within a fire barrier is limited to 156 square feet. There are exceptions to that. Look at number 1. There is no limit on the size of openings of adjoining fire areas that are sprinklered. So if I have 2 fire areas, one to the left, one to the right, and I have a common fire barrier in between, and both of them are sprinklered on the left and on the right, the 150 square foot rule is out. The openings must still be protected, and the 25% rule of wall length, maximum opening of the wall length allowed, is still applicable. Again, it could be a lot sometimes to deal with because it's a lot of criteria, but go to that page and read the exceptions, and you will find it. Fire door serving enclosures leading to interior exit stairways. So when you're a 10-story building, you open the door, you want to go into the stair enclosure. Okay, even though that's a stair enclosure, meaning a rated shaft, and the door is actually opening into the shaft, the provision of the 25% of the wall length and the 156 feet do not apply when you're opening a door to get into the exit enclosure. You cannot come and tell somebody you're exceeding this and you're exceeding that. That does not apply. It also, look at number 4, it does not apply when you finish the stair enclosure and you end up at the bottom and you have an exit passageway that's going to take you to a lobby or directly to the outside. That rule does not apply either. Look at number 3. This is actually extremely, extremely important. If openings assembly have same or higher rating than the fire barrier or firewall itself, per ASTM 19, the 156 square foot rule and the 25% rule are both out. So how does that work? I have a 2-hour fire barrier, and I'm going to show you later in the presentation what kind of protection I need for the 2-hour fire barrier. I'm going to show you that. But if and the windows may actually need to be 1 hour, and the door may have to be 1 hour. What this section says, if you give me a 2-hour wall or a 1-hour wall, and you put in openings in there that are actually rated higher than the wall or equal, meaning you got a 2-hour wall, you put in 2-hour windows, and you put in 2-hour doors, guess what? We're not going to go in there and scold you on the 156 square foot rule and the 25% rule. A lot of times you can actually buy a fully rated assembly, companies that would make a 50-foot fire barrier that will deliver and get assembled on site, including the openings, and it's been tested and approved with ASTM 119. Bingo, done. None of those rules would apply. Again, the idea is to have a limited protection. But if your protections that are there exceed or are equal to the wall value as far as the protection, then all of these constraints go away. Okay, here is the summary for all the fire barriers. Again, you can read it. I know it's a lot of stuff for a lot of people that had very basic knowledge or had a lot of knowledge and has not been looking at this, because we don't see this every day. It does get a little bit either redundant and a little confusing, but again, use the slides. It will help you a lot. There is a little change relevant to exit passageway. I'm not going to go over, which is in red on this one because it's chapter 10. There's a required continuity, actually. Usually those walls have to go all the way to the roof and what have you, but for exit passageways, they put in a change in the code that exit passageways, the walls there do not have to go all the way to the roof or what have you. You can just put in a 2-hour lid or a 1-hour lid similar to what the walls are rated in that exit passageway, and that's good enough. And that makes sense. I'm already in a safe haven rated 1 hour or 2 hours. Why would I need the walls to go all the way? It made absolutely no sense the way it was in an exit passageway before. So that's just a little change in chapter 10 I wanted you to be aware of. Okay, smoke barriers we're not covering. Summary of smoke barriers we're not covering. Okay, this is the chart. I'm actually going to go through it now just in case somebody leaves the presentation early, even though it's going to appear later on. I'm going to give you a quick history of this one. When my daughter was 12 or 13, she needed money and she helped me put this one together. It was supposed to be 25 or 50 per hour, 25 per hour, or whatever. I thought she's talking cents. She's talking actually dollars. This one ended up costing me $100. She came up with the design after I explained to her what I need to be done in a way that would attract the attendees. So I called it the $100 chart simply because it literally cost me $100. And as I actually said in my class before at the County of LA, when I called her, because it came with unlimited changes, when I called her one time to make the changes before my presentation 4 months ago, she reminded me that she actually has a mortgage now and she doesn't have the time for me. So that was the little joke there, and that will continue. Okay, this is how this chart works from the left to the right. First thing, look on top, there's a penetrating duct. There's an exterior wall, shaft, SP, smoke partition, a smoke barrier, fire partition, fire barrier, firewall, horizontal exit. Now, somebody basically was saying that fire partitions would require smoke dampers. So the way to use this table is let's talk about the fire partition. I'm sorry. So look at the yellow one with the star on it, FP. The way this works is you determine first what is the application that you have. So I got a fire partition. Okay, now I go to the table on the right-hand side, and I have to determine, is it an SFM occupancy or is it a non-SFM occupancy? If it's an SFM occupancy, all I need is 2. I go to the bottom and I need a fire damper, period. If it is a non-SFM occupancy, I need a 2 and a 3. I need a fire damper, and exceptions apply. I do not see that I put in here that I need a smoke damper. I promise I will go back and look. To my knowledge, fire partitions do not need the smoke damper and only need fire dampers. If this is a mistake based on the question that came up, my apology. I will definitely look and make the adjustment before I send the final presentation to the chapter. But this is, from what I recall, is the case on what I have. If I am dealing, for example, with a fire barrier, and I'm dealing with an M occupancy, looking at the table, FB is 2 and 3. I would need a fire damper, and there are exceptions that apply. You can now go to the code and read the exceptions. If you're dealing with a state fire marshal application, like an assembly occupancy and a fire barrier, number 1 and number 2 is what you need. So you go at the bottom of that table in blue. Number 1, you would need the smoke damper. Number 2, you would need a fire damper. And you know, you can create this table and change it in so many ways, but we're talking about a 13-year-old kid that put it together in a way to attract the attention with all the colors and what have you. And I tell you the truth, it worked. I still use it till this present day. Okay, floor and roof assemblies. These are the horizontal assemblies. We're dealing with table 601 and 705.5. The two things I needed to keep in mind: requires separation of occupancies, horizontal or vertical. Go to table 508.4. It's a different subject matter. And also 707.310, which is this one that we've talked about too earlier. If you are using this requirement for fire barrier assemblies or horizontal assemblies between two fire areas, then you would actually need to go to that table. Okay, we are now at 9:05. I am reconvene back in about 5 minutes, and this is basically going to be a scheduled break, and we'll go back in about 4 to 5 minutes. Cynthia, anything on your end?
No, just when we get back, there's a couple questions in the chat that we can go over.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to come back and try to continue a little bit, actually, and then I'll take those. That's
Okay.
okay.
Sounds
Perfect.
good.
Thank you.
Hmm?
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm back. Cynthia,
Yep,
I am ready to go. Shall I?
awesome.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, we are going to deal a little bit with floor penetrations of horizontal assemblies right now. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I do want to let you know what an F rating is and what a T rating. An F rating is now required and is required to stop fire, flame, and gases from passing through a horizontal assembly. The test standard is UL 1479. The way it works is, this is the way it is. When you have a rated floor assembly and you have like a drain there, you have to have a protection. And there is something called a T rating and an F rating. The T rating is no longer required. Only the F rating is now required when you have that situation in a rated horizontal assembly. What is the F rating and what is the T rating? What are those? There are two measures of fire stop system that indicate how long they can resist fire and heat. So the F rating is the time that require that a barrier can prevent the passage of flame through an opening. The T rating is the time the temperature on the non-fire side of the barrier does not exceed a certain temperature. So when you have an exit enclosure in a 10-story building, a lot of you may know that it's a 2-hour rated shaft enclosure or exit enclosure. They call it now interior exit stairway, by the way. And the doors are an hour and a half rated, and there has to be, on the other side of non-fire, it needs to be able to handle a 450 degrees. That's what they call a T rating. The F rating is what is going to be used now on that drain. You do not need the fitting to be T rated. These are things that a building inspector needs to ask for when you see a horizontal rated assembly with something like that. Show me the F rating for the assembly that you are putting relevant to the connection. Okay. It talks about which is easier to achieve here. You can read that. And I'm going to move to vertical openings. When are they permitted without a rated shaft? When it comes to vertical openings, there are many requirements that apply. And a lot of those are rated shaft to be rated for 1 hour, 2 hours, etc. This section is basically to just tell you all the things that would not trigger a requirement for a rated shaft. The most important one are the ones in red, basically. When you're penetrating a shaft with cables, tubes, vents, etc., you just have to go to a specific section of the code called the through and membrane penetration and follow what's required. And that's forthcoming. Also in 717, when you have a duct penetrating it, you just have to go in there and be compliant and put in the appropriate dampers. Here are also other exceptions when you do not have to have a rated shaft. These are the two most important ones I want you to remember. You don't need a rated shaft between a mezzanine and the floor below. And the exit access stairs and ramp per section 1019, meaning it is not an interior exit stairway. An interior exit stairway basically used to be called exit enclosure. So if I have a 2-story building, the stairs could be open. They do not need to be in a shaft. They do not need to be within walls and rated enclosures. Once I get into a 3-story building, then I actually have an interior exit stairway, previously known as exit enclosure. I do not like the word interior exit stairway. I like the word exit enclosure just because I already know I am in a rated system. Now, every time I hear the word interior exit stairway, I got to transfer that into rated when I got used for years into the word exit enclosure. But again, that's the code. Somebody convinced the committee that they need to change the name, and they did. So again, a 2-story building, no rating for the shaft or the area stairs and the walls around them. 3 stories and higher, you're going to need a 1 hour, maybe even 2 hours, depending on how many stories. We're going to talk a little bit about wall penetrations. Anytime you penetrate a rated wall, whether it's the garage to the house or many other applications, you have to use the sealants that are equivalent to the wall. 3M makes a lot of rated good sealants, 1 hour, 2 hours.
Mazen, I have a question.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yes, thank you. On a two-story building, if I have an elevator, does the elevator shaft need to be rated?
No, never.
Thank you. Elevator room, equipment room.
Yeah, you don't
Okay.
need to, and if it goes to a 3-story and it needs to, now you have to create a lobby which can even be exempt if the building is sprinkled, but a 2-story, no, that's totally
you.
optional. No.
Great.
Okay. The inspector's job is extremely important when it comes to looking at sealants being used out in the field. I would definitely ask to see the sealants being used, that they did not just pick up a regular caulking, they picked up an actual tested, rated 1 hour or a 2 hour sealant when I have a conduit penetrating a fire barrier, etc. I would actually go the distance and ask for that. I need to see what they're using. Okay. Same thing for penetrations. If you want to know what sections to go to for horizontal penetrations of rated horizontal floors, or fire barriers, firewalls, etc., I just gave you the sections to read. And from now on, there are few things that I need to show you that are helpful to you. So this is a smoke barriers. We're not going to cover that. Talking about fire barriers, etc., you go into a stair enclosure and you see these all the time. I've only written that correction in my life once. I had a rated stair enclosure, and I had a what do you call this? A pipe stand. I forgot the name, God, but you know, and you have to come in and connect with the fire department, can connect to it, and the cabinet is installed, and the cabinet has penetrated that fire barrier. That cabinet needs to be a rated cabinet. They cannot just buy one and put it. They need to buy the one that is rated to go on the rated enclosure, within the rated enclosure. So if this thing here, if that whole thing, if the cabinet is not rated, you cannot have that, because now you've penetrated it and you need to have the right protection. So they do sell them. They don't really sell a whole lot that is not rated out there, because they normally use them in
Yeah,
high rises and 3 stories and
I'm on-
higher. I'm going to give you 3 summary of penetration summary depending on the type of walls. And these were not created by me. These came to me one time from Stuart Tom, maybe over 10 years ago. A couple of sections may have changed, but they are still very helpful. You enter this based on the type of wall, type of penetration, and you see what kind of protection you need. It's a very good summary from the code that he put together. I am going to go over one example relevant to this one here, when I have steel electrical boxes in a rated assembly. And I'm going to take you directly to that example. Automatic sprinklers, recessed lights, penetrating assemblies. It'll tell you on top you need what they call an escutcheon plate. And when you have recessed lights in a rated ceiling, that even the recessed lights need to be rated, or the building official needs to approve the sealant used around them for that annular space when they penetrated that 1 hour ceiling, which a lot of building officials say, no, go by the rated recessed, what do you call it, light assembly. Okay, so this section here came from this. The one you see on top is actually this. And I'm going to take this one and give you a quick example. We're going to move forward. Here's another one for all the listed electrical boxes of any material, penetrations. Here is one that is strictly for steel electrical boxes. When I have steel electrical boxes penetrating rated wall assemblies, and I have recessed fixtures like electrical boxes, how do I deal with that? What do I do? Here's a diagram. And yes, my daughter helped me with that one. So in a 10 by 10 rated wall assembly, let's say of 2 hours, the sprinkler actually gets a little plate called an escutcheon plate. Your openings for the outlet cannot be more than 16 square inch. Within every 100 square feet, you're only allowed 100 square inches of openings. The distance between the boxes on opposite side of the walls need to be 24 inches. However, we both know in rated assemblies, we see them back to back every day, all day. You can do that. But you see that 1/8 inch max there that you have created as far as the annular space? You go back to the exception here and you actually read 1.4 at the bottom, and you can use rated special listed putty pads that you would apply in addition to blocking probably right behind it in that area within the wall, and you can have them back to back. But if you do not do that, then you need to keep them 24 inches apart when they are on different side of the wall. I'm not an expert on this, to be honest with you, but this is as much as I know. And I ask inspectors to get familiar with that section because they will see that a lot, especially in Los Angeles, where they always developing a new 10 unit, a new apartment complex, etc., etc., etc. Okay, this is slide 77, opening protectives. I need to take a 30-second break and I'll be right back. My apology. Okay, this is the section where everybody, actually, I need everybody to really focus with me and wake up. This is one of the most important sections in chapter 7. Knowing how to deal with opening protection, the type, windows, doors, windows within doors, all kinds of things, how to read the tables that are there. A lot of us actually, honestly, do not know what these tables are. They are confusing. I'm going to try walk you through it and give you a couple of examples to make you feel comfortable in using those. Now, when it comes to fire resistance opening protection, you have to do certain things. The protection of those openings have to comply with the standards 119 or UL 263, as well as the opening protection required in the tables to follow. The required fire resistance opening protection shall be permitted to be established by any of the following methods. You either design, document, and approved source, you do certain calculations, you look at certain NFPA standards, or you apply for a modification or alternate method of construction with the local building official. There are 3 extremely important tables in Chapter 7, 716.1, 716.2, 716.3. Let me take you first to 716.1 and tell you what that table has. This one is for fire-rated glazing assemblies. And this is the marking. So when you see a window and it has etching on it, and it has all kind of mumbo-jumbo stuff, you have no idea what that is, I'm going to tell you what that would be. The table says fire-rated glazing assemblies, but the table also has things that are actually for doors. Take a look at this. This is table 716.1. If your marking on a window is W, it means it meets the wall assembly criteria. If it's OH, it meets the fire window assembly criteria, including the hose stream test. These are the things you will actually see on a window. If you see on a door D, it means the door has met the fire door assembly criteria testing of NFPA 252 and UL 10B. If you actually see T, it tells you that it meets the 450 temperature rise for 30 minutes. And where do you normally see that? That would normally be on a glass window that is within an exit enclosure door. That's where that T would be. Or it could be on the label for the door itself. That is the T rating, and usually that's required in an exit enclosure. Now, the ones that are in yellow, FC, and what it says in yellow meets floor ceiling criteria. These are the changes that were made in the 2022 code. They actually added FC there. And FC meaning it meets the floor ceiling criteria. They're talking about a wall assembly here, but they also want to make sure that it's not just the wall assembly. It could be a wall assembly or it could be a horizontal assembly. So they actually revised that table in the new code with the yellow markers that I have shown on it. This is really abstract, and you may say, why do I need this? The only reason you need this is because the following tables are going to reference them. And if you see, or a building inspector sees any of those in the field, they know that, that what these mean. If you actually see 60, it belongs to the triple X at the bottom, meaning that window or that door is a 60-minute rated window or rated door. This is table 716.2. It gets a little bit more complicated now. This table is used to tell you the required wall assembly rating. So if I have, look at where my left hand arrow is. If I have an enclosure that is actually rated for 2 hours, okay, if it happens to be 2 hours, the minimum fire door and fire shutter assemblies that I need along the 2-hour wall is going to be 1.5 hours. If I have a window within that door, example will follow, it's limited to 100 square inches. And there are other criteria that it may go above or less. And it talks also about fire protection and fire resistance glazing. We're going to define those later. And it talks about the windows. Look at all the way at the very end, where the red arrow is on the left, go all the way to the end where you see W120. So if I have a fire rated glazing marking, side light next to the door, rated door, I'm not talking about a regular window. I'm talking about a window that's either a transom, which is right above the rated door, or a side light, which is to the left or to the right of the door. That needs to be 2 hours. The only way you're going to follow this really is when we go through an example in a minute. This is the continuation of the same table. Let's go through an example so we can put this to a little bit of testing. Take a look at the area where it says example in smoke barriers. And I know this is a lot of material. This can get a little complicated. So what I wrote on that table on top, this is for wall assembly, doors, shutters, door vision panel, and transom panel only. Table 716.2 cannot be used to determine what is the rating required for regular windows in a firewall or a fire barrier. That is not what this table is about. This table is about doors, shutters, door vision panels, and transom panel, meaning the window adjacent to the door, immediately next to the door. That's called a side light or a transom. Okay, so this table is very specific. It is for those type of assemblies only. We're going to go now to an example, but I want to let you know in the 2022 code, they added double firewalls under the type of assembly. The first column on the left, type of assembly, they've added a criteria called double firewalls, and then they filled in the table of what's required. This table actually is from 2019, but I wanted to highlight what the changes are in that table in the new code. Okay. If you look at the very bottom, if you have windows within the rated assembly, this is in the yellow criteria, other than door vision or transom windows, go to table 716.13. Let's go through some examples so you can put this into perspective. This is 716.3 for the windows, and I'll come back to that when we have an example. The one thing I want to tell you about this table, when you are looking of how much protection you need for a fire window assembly within a rated wall assembly, you use this table. If you have a tested wall assembly, so if I go to a company that sells me a pre-manufactured fire barrier for 2 hours along with the windows, and it has passed the ASTM 119 and UL 263, and it has a manifest that this is a full 2-hour fire barrier along with a 2-hour windows and all the openings, and it's a fully tested by a lab, you don't need this table. That product is going to overrule this table. If I have tested wall assembly, and I'm reading here, including windows as a part of the pre-tested assemblies, I do not need this table, which does not happen too often, because if you go that route, it's way more expensive. A fire barrier could be 2 hours, and now you have to go into 2-hour stuff from that company, while this table may require something less. Let's go through examples. Here's example 1, and I'm dealing with a 1-hour fire resistance rated smoke barrier. I have a door and I have a side light next to it. I need to know what is the requirement from 716.1.2 on everything I see. Okay, so I go to 716.2. I'm going to notice that I need a 20-minute door. I'm going to go back to that table for you. Look at the example. Look at the fire door. It's 1/3. It's not really clear, but it's 1/3. So it's 20 minutes. And that's what I show here, 20-minute door. Look at the vision panel. Its size is limited to the maximum size tested, and it has to be 20 minutes, D20. So I will actually try find that as well. Vision panel. Vision panel. Vision panel is column number 4. The vision panel can be to the maximum size tested, meaning they can use 100 by default, or it could be to the maximum size tested within that smoke barrier if they have done some testing. And the rating of that needs to be D20. D, you go back to that table, the first one, and it'll tell you what the D means, and the 20 meaning it's a 20-minute rated window. As far as the side light, let's go back to the table and see what the side light requirement is. I'm talking about the window located to the left of the door. So let's go back. You will see that that needs to be, which is column 6, that needs to be 3/4 hour. If you look at column 6 of this table, the heading, there's something called fire protection and fire resistance glazing. What is the difference between those? We're going to get into that, and I will explain that once we get into that perspective section. With that, this example is done. There's another example here that you can do on your own, leading and using table 716.2. I'm going to go to an example, and this is the table to use for example 2. This one, this one. I'm going to do an example 3 here, which is a glazing protection example. I want to use table 716.1-3 now. So I'm given a 1-hour incidental use fire barrier wall. I need to know the required protection for that fire window that you see. I will go to table 716.1.3. It will tell me, and here's the arrow. If you follow the arrow, and it will tell you that you need a 3/4 minimum fire window assembly rating is 3/4. It's 45 minutes. So that is a 45-minute window, and the marking is OH45 or W60, meaning it can meet the hose stream test with a 45-minute, or it can meet the window requirement of being rated for whatever. But it can meet the W60 or it can meet the OH45. Either one of them, that's the marking you're going to see on the window. Look at the word fire protection rated glazing, and I wrote above it, not fire resistance. What is the difference between fire protection rating and fire resistance rating? A fire resistance rated window is a much better than a fire protection rated glazing. Fire protection rated glazing is only going to give you, and I'm going to get into that, is only going to give you up to a 1 hour of protection. A fire resistance can give you that and can also shield the heat from one side to the other. Let's talk about the labeling of fire doors. Basically, when you see fire doors, their labeling is going to look like this. It's a sticker that you go out there, and unfortunately, they paint the sticker. Normally, they will put in the requirement fire rating. They will fill this. Temperature rise 30 minutes. Usually, that's going to carry 450. And that's going to be the kind of door that fire inspectors when they inspect those buildings, they will look to see that the 450 degrees is actually shown there. And the building department is the one that's going to be looking for the fire rating of the door of being 1.5 hours, for example, in a 2-hour shaft for stairway serving a 5-story building. So fire department doesn't really look at the fire rating of this one because it's not really his inspection unless he knows from being in the building department before or he's had some training. And the one at the bottom actually applies to both fire department and building department. But it is normally 450 in this case when it comes to doors. Unfortunately, what do they do when they paint? It gets painted over. And a lot of times they say, let's see. Yeah, if you look at this one here, actually it's upside down, my apology. It says, do not remove or cover this label. Just hold your computer if you have a laptop and swing it clockwise 90 degrees and read it, and it's, or tilt your head 90 degrees. I think the first one is easier. Here is a marking that is actually on a door that has windows. All the bottom ones, UL9 and 10B and 10C, are certain tests that were done for that door. And these are the numbers for the door tests. And everything that you see here, the OH and what have you and all that, are for the door and the window. You even know that you got a laminated window there with 8 millimeter, etc., etc. Let's talk about fire protective glazing versus fire resistive glazing. Fire protective glazing, it cannot exceed the 25% of the wall area, and it does not block radiant heat transmission. These are the test standards for fire protective glazing. It is normally used in doors and openings up to 45 minutes. So if I have a corridor and I need to put in a 45-minute rated window, I have the right to use a fire protective glazing when I place my order instead of fire resistive glazing, because it is up to 45 minutes. And that fire partition normally requires a 45-minute window within that rated corridor or the fire partition. So I can use fire protective glazing. Look at the test standards they have at the bottom. It does not meet 119 and it does not meet 263, which is the very, very, very basics that we talked about for all wall assemblies, etc., etc., because it's only for fire protective. It is not fire resistant. And the most important drawback on this one is it does not block radiant heat transmission. Yet you can use it when you have less than 1 hour. The only time that I see a table, and I always think it's a flaw, but I've never applied and for a coded change with ICC, maybe I should talk to Paul Armstrong, is to look at this table here, and I'm going to take you back to that. Let me find it. Goodness. Okay, look at this table. Look to the left under exterior walls. Under exterior walls, I have minimum side light transom assembly rating, which is column 6. And then the requirement is 1.5 hours. And you are allowed to do that under fire protection glazing, when normally it's 1.5 hours, and you can do that with a fire protection. I don't know how you can do that when fire protection is only limited to 45 minutes. Anytime you're dealing with a 1 hour or more, you can't have fire protection window. You must have a fire resistant window. So that 1.5 hours there, in my opinion, should state not permitted. I'm going to ask Paul to look into that. That's always to me been an error, but whether I am wrong or not, I will have to approach him. But I just wanted to show you where there could be an error on a table. But maybe for a retired guy, I'm not looking to make code changes. I just go with the flow. Okay. Let's talk about fire resistive glass. It blocks radiant heat. It can be used on walls and doors, 60 minutes and above. Look at all the ASTM measurements. Look at all the ASTM's classifications that you can have. These are the right ingredients, 119, 251, 263. If you remember at the beginning of the session on like slide number 3 or 4, I put in a slide that says all those 3 are exactly the same. And this is the one that plays a big role when it comes to this. Please excuse me 1 second. Okay, there are size limitations for fire protection rated and fire protection, for fire protection rated and fire resistance rated. The heading of that slide is wrong, my apology. It should be size limitation of fire protection rated and fire resistant rated construction glazing. Please adjust that in your presentation, or I will make sure I'll fix it before I give it to the basin chapter. If you want to know how much you can have relevant to fire resistance glazing and fire protection rated glazing, there are limits on how much you can have, and there are certain requirements. For time constraint being 2 hours, I can't go much over that. There is a note in a specific table, and there are guidelines, and I've given you all the sections and everything you need about it in case you decide to dig in deep and read anything about that. Remember what I mentioned, these 3? These 3 are exactly the same tests. Ducts and air transfer openings. This section is basically dealing with ducts that are penetrated aerated assembly. Each one of those 2 criteria here has a table. You can go to the table and look at it, but if a duct is penetrating a 2-hour fire resistant rated assembly, then I need 1.5-hour damper rating, whether it's fire, smoke, what have you. If you're penetrating more than 3-hour fire rated assembly or equal, then I need a 3-hour minimum damper rating. Openings in attics and draft stops. Okay, the one thing I want you to know about a draft stop is not a rated assembly. It's an assembly, but it's not a rated assembly. Look at the bottom in red. It can be if you decide to rate it, yet it's not required to be. When we have apartments or condos or units, we have a 1 hour in between. And that 1 hour wall, as you know, continues all the way to the roof. Now, from what I recall, you do not need a full 1 hour rated all the way to the roof. What you need is to have only a draft stop in that attic, and the 1 hour wall can actually stop at the ceiling. That part that continues in the roof is a draft stop. If you do decide to put any opening in it, that wall cannot, that wall can have openings, but it has to be self-closers inside it, inside that wall, which is the draft stop. Again, it is not a rated assembly. You can make it a rated assembly, but you don't have to. There is a criteria in the code that has been eliminated. Usually in attics, every 3,000 square feet, you need to have a draft stop. And, you know, it even had the criteria of 9,000 square feet by the state fire marshal that if sprinklered every 100 feet, etc., they took that out of the code. It's no longer there. This is basically if you're dealing with any non-state fire marshal occupancy. In case you are dealing with a non-state fire marshal occupancy, the way to deal with it is, and you want to know what's required, you simply go to the table here, and it'll tell you the section, and it'll tell you what's required. If you do not want to use that, you can always go to my daughters and look at that. And I tried for a long time to help him make me changes, but again, I am no longer a paying party to her mortgage, and based on that, she has not helped me with much. With that, I actually have finished the presentation. The forthcoming 7 or 8 slides are in chapter 9, which is not a part of this presentation. But the reason I decided to give you those is I wanted to give you something to show you when sprinklers are required in a building based on chapter 9. And these are the ones. There's this, there's that, and all of these have been upgraded based on the new code. I want to thank you all for attending. I do want to take a couple of questions if you have any. Yet, unfortunately, due to my mother-in-law being in the hospital, it would be limited. And with that, I turn it back to Cynthia and to the attendees with a lot of thank you for being here today. And, you know, a lot of people try to email me. You're welcome to email me. I'm a little slow sometimes in responding. I will respond back. You're also welcome to call if you have questions here and there that comes up. But again, try not to wait 6 months before you go over this. Spend about an hour going over this within the next 3 days, and your amount of retention will be at least 80%. You let it go a week, you're down to 5 or 10%. But again, use it as you see fit. It has a lot of things, it has a lot of tables, it has a lot of summaries. The amount of time that it took to actually create this, which used to be 250 slides, is absolutely enormous. We did this like in a 2-hour seminar today. Normally it's a half a day where we have breakfast and then all that. And by the way, the ICC Basin chapter is going to send you all your vouchers so you can go to Starbucks, right, Cynthia? Hello?
That's correct, Mazen.
Boy, I woke you, I
I'm
woke
like,
you up. So with that, I want to definitely thank you all. It is a half a day seminar because the speed is actually lower. It is less. It is not as fast when we are in a 4-hour setting and we have a 3 15-minute break and cup of coffee in the morning and a little bit of chat here and there. And, you know, we do a few jokes here and there. And that actually carries it. But we're able to do it in 2 hours, a little bit on the concise, a little bit on the restrictive side, and kind of really pushing the envelope. So my apology if the speed was a little bit on the fast forward mode, but hopefully you will find this presentation helpful to you. If you're a building official, if you're a plan check engineer, that would really, really help you. And if you're a building inspector, it will definitely give you a lot of the knowledge to know when to ask for sealants, when rated walls are being butchered, if you need to go back and ask. And the one thing I ask all the plan check engineers, when you're dealing with firewalls, when you're dealing with a fire barrier, when you're dealing with a fire partition, make sure on your floor plan even, and in your cross sections, even if you have to write it yourself, you know, usually there's a cross detail that says 1A1 and you go there and it's a fire barrier detail. I usually go more. I actually write on it fire barrier because you know, I'd like the inspector to have it to see it on 2 or 3 locations, in the cross section, in the actual detail of the wall construction or the assembly, in the floor plan. When it catches his eye or her eye out there, they know they have to do a protective and a good job, and basically handle with care, approach with caution, fragile, if you want to call it. So they keep an eye on anybody really messing up with that wall, putting only 1 layer instead of 2 because they ran out of drywall and the contractor's trying to save money and time and all of that. And you know, he sees that in many places. He looks at the detail. He realizes it's 2 hours. They only put 1 layer on both sides. He's going to catch it. The more help you give the inspector out there, the better things are. Because remember, building inspectors have to follow the plans. They got to go to 12 to 20 jobs depending on the jurisdiction. And a lot of times they are limited in time. And you walk into a job that has all those criteria and he's got 15 inspections on that day, his chances of missing a lot is going to take place, and it's going to happen. So any help you can give your building inspector out there is extremely important. I also urge all building officials listening to this or getting the message that when you have a pretty involved jobs that have that and have elevator lobbies, not mentioning where this happened, but it did happen at a location that I know. You have elevator lobbies and it was missed. You have firewalls, you have fire barriers. Take a walk through at the end. You're not going to disassemble the wall, but take a walk and take a look to see at least that you are simply, or keep an eye on those things as much as possible. In assembly occupancies, I've always proposed in LA County, and it's not being done, unfortunately. And I propose in every jurisdiction, when you have any assembly occupancy before a building departments give their final, you got to go out there and take a quick look. Make sure the exits are in place. The location of exits is correct. The ADA parking is correct. Yes, the building inspector is there, but the building inspector can still easily miss. Some of them have 2-year experience. Some of them have 20. And we still have 2-year experienced inspectors that are absolute rising stars, looking at a 500-person occupancy church. But again, we can miss things. So I urge you to get involved. I urge you to make inspections on those items as much as possible and help your building inspector whenever possible. With that, I am done with my presentation.
Thank you, Mazen. Would you have time for a few questions from the attendees?
I will do my best to handle a couple if that's okay.
Okay, Jim. Jim, did you want to unmute and ask your questions? Jim Brewster.
Come on, Jimmy.
Okay.
Maybe he's gone.
Oh, Jim's question, I can read Jim's question. It says, can you please cover primary and secondary structural members and their protection? So
I
that
can't.
was probably
I
chapter
cannot because
6.
that is in chapter 6, table 601. So it's not a part of the scope of that. However, the only thing I can say is you go to table 601 and it'll tell you what is required to be 1 hour, 2 hours, etc. And then there are exceptions there where when you have like the roof more than 20 feet from the floor, like staples and all of that, it doesn't have to be rated or etc. etc. But being that these things are actually in chapter 6, it's not something I can cover other than refer you to table 601 and tell you, look at the definitions that are in chapter 2 for all of those items. And then it's clear on 601 what's required. They'll tell you whether you need a 1 hour or 2 hours and all of that. And there are footnotes. The table is pretty much self-guiding.
All right, thank you, Mazen. There's another question here. Question about the rating of door and windows located within a firewall. What is the reason that the rating of the windows or doors can be less than the rating of the wall that the windows or doors are located in? Is it just based off testing of assemblies?
I don't want to say I have to defer this to ICC, but this is the way. You see, there are things in the code that make sense. There are things in the code that sometimes you say, what good is a wall having 2 hours and now putting a window that's an hour and a half? Shouldn't it be all the same? That's why there is a section that throws away the 156 and the 25% on firewalls and fire barriers if you decide to make everything the same degree as the wall is. So you get rewarded and we'll let everything go. But as far as the opening, look, the opening protection can be protected or unprotected depending on the table. The protections itself can be an hour, hour and a half, in a 2 hour. Why shouldn't it be 2 hour? Remember, the code is not perfect. The code, apparently this has gone through tons of assemblies, tons of testing, it's based, in my opinion, about the history of fires, the casualties, the way the code evolved, and how openings were not used to be protected in the beginning and how they used to start making them protected more and more and more. And then the cost played an incredible factor in all of that. To go from a 1.5 hour door to 2 hours is more likely 75 or 100% more on the cost. A 2 hour door is probably $1,500, maybe even more. To go from a 1 hour window to a 2 hour window is triple the cost. So the cost is a huge factor on this. Of course, you say, what about the human life? You cannot put the cost on a human life. I agree with you 100%. But again, I don't have all the data as to why this has been the case. I've asked myself that question all my life, but the way they leave it is they give a reward when you go in there and you actually meet the criteria of the wall. But that's always just been the way it is. Opening can be located in one section as protected, in another section that's unprotected. Right then and there, you can tell. So you're telling me I can mix and match. You go to the store and they say 5 for $1 and you can mix and match. You can take this and then one of this and one of that and all of this. To me, this is like a mix and match, but I'm not here to bash ICC and the committees. We are all here on the same team, working to ensure that we have basically safe buildings. Apparently, this is what is considered a safe building in the eyes of the generation of committees after committees after committees, cycle after cycle, when it came to putting the codes together. Hope that helps answer your question.
Yes, thank you, Mazen. It looks like there's one more regarding footnotes for table 705.8 when refers to S for sprinkler, for section 903.3.1.1, NFPA 13. When referring to sprinkler buildings, can the table values for unprotected and sprinklered be used for buildings with NFPA 13R?
Wait. Let me go back to that. Where are we dealing with? The table 705.5?
705.8. When it's referring to sprinklers.
Is that a table or that's just a section that he has? Okay, can you read me that again? Is he asking from a table or that I put it?
Yeah,
there?
from the table 705.8 for allowable area of openings.
Okay, I'm looking at it now. Go ahead.
Under the footnotes for unprotected and sprinklered, when it refers to section 903.3.1.1, can that also be used for NFPA 13R?
Okay, what footnote is he talking about? From what I know, this table can be used for anything relevant to exterior wall opening and deciding what percentage and the location, etc., etc.
Well, when you're referring to unprotected, I believe I know what Reza is getting at. When referring to
I think
unprotected,
it's about the US and footnote says 903.3.1.1, which is NFPA 13. So I think NFPA 13R will not work here because it clearly says NFPA 903.3.1.1 is NFPA 13. So Reza's question is, if I use that for residential NFPA 13R, will that work?
I can't answer it right away. So you're telling me to read the note for unprotected openings in buildings not equipped or equipped. Which one are you talking about? I'm reading the note. There's two notes at the bottom, right? The footnotes. Are you there?
Yes. And Reza's question is if it's okay to use NFPA 13R and use this line, but NFPA 13R is not covered by 903.3.1.1. So
yeah,
I would jump in and answer on your behalf, Mazen.
So,
yeah, the footnote clearly says that 903.3.1.1, which is not including NFPA 13R. That should be the answer. I think that's
that's NFPA 13. So in 13R, I don't think you can use it. Let's see, unprotected, equipped throughout with automatic sprinkler system in accordance. Yeah, 903.3.1.1 is just 13 by itself, correct?
Yes.
That means that this table only is going to go to 13. I don't think you can use it in 13R. I've never thought about that yet. I see here includes buildings accessory for R3. I need to look into that myself because I see the word R's floating around at the bottom footnotes. Initially, I would have to agree and say this table will be restricted to the usage of NFPA 13. But I would like to do a little bit more digging myself. But initially, looking at this, I would have to agree it's just NFPA 13. Is that Aura actually? I'm trying to figure out who the voice.
that's Aura.
I was going to say that
Mazen, I believe he is correct.
Mazen, starting yesterday, the bylaws are changed, and that's the presenter's responsibility to provide vouchers for everyone. Just let you know.
Good. And since you were the first presenter on the first
starting yesterday,
I can't wait to get my voucher.
You didn't hear me. Starting yesterday, that was changed.
Listen, I heard you, but it's called selective hearing, by the way. And two, actually, you know, all the presenters cannot ask questions and go on because they are notorious of making the presentation go another half an hour.
Hi, Mazen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. I'd like to add to your answer on the opening protection and firewalls. I was told 40 years ago by Vince Bush, you all remember him, that the reason the rating on the openings are less is there's no fuel for the fire in doorways and especially area separation walls with roll-up doors, fire-rated doors. You're not going to have fuel for the fire on either side of that door. My concern has always been, well, yeah, but you could shut the door and put storage on both sides, and then that negates the reduced fire load. But with that said, that's what I was told 40 years ago. Yeah.
That could be it, and that makes sense, and it's coming from a very, very educated, reliable, knowledgeable source.
Yes. I.e., that was not me.
With that, I'm pretty much done. I will let Eugene take it here to just have a closing remark. And I really appreciate everybody taking the 2 hours from the busy schedule today. And I appreciate your support to that chapter, which honestly, unless we all get together to support that chapter and stay together as a team and keep training as a team and support that chapter in every way and financially too, and then that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you again, Mazen. That seems to be the end of the questions. So this will conclude our training. Again, CEUs and a copy of the presentation will be sent out later this week. With that being said, we are going to terminate this recording and close out the meeting. Thanks again, everyone.
Eugene, just for the record, really quick, what I will do is today is Wednesday.